All right, here we are. I am Jordan Zakarin. I am the writer and editor and publisher and just guy behind Progress Report, and I'm very excited to be joined by Alejandra Gomez, who is the head executive director of Lucha, which is an unbelievable organization that's been around for a long time in Arizona. Grassroots organizers, doing incredible work. They had a huge accomplishment this past month, and we really want to highlight that and talk about that and some other things. Data centers, which is something that Lucha wasn't always involved in, but it's become such a huge issue all across the country. And Arizona, which I don't know if it's the capital of data centers, but it's been a lot of them. I mean, maybe Virginia's the capital, but there's a lot of data centers there. They actually had tax breaks for years for it. Lucha was able to organize and make sure that they suspended the tax break for the last 3 years for data centers, which is like maybe the biggest statewide accomplishment in the country in terms of we're trying to rein these things in, which is unbelievable considering just the political makeup of Arizona. It's not, I live in New York City, and you think it'd be here first. So yeah, Alejandro, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, excited to talk about it.
Yeah, so let's start with what I didn't realize initially. Because data centers is something you hear about more recently, right? But it's been around. I think Arizona's had tax breaks since 2013 for data centers, and so like when did this start coming on your radar and becoming a thing that people are really mad about? Because it's only been in recent years that like people kind of really started to understand it. I feel like.
Yeah, it's been at least like in the last year and a half, 2 years, where community members that have been now facing a lot of the challenges, both with groundwater in rural communities and also just the scarcity of water that exists in Arizona, and seeing a lot of these data centers pop up near their homes, near their neighborhoods. And in a moment where Arizona also doesn't have supposedly enough money for schools, for support with utility costs. And what we're also feeling, right, is like the crunch and groceries, the inability to pay for gas at this time, and also just the skyrocketing price of housing. So people are starting to pay attention. How come there's all these tax breaks for data centers? Why are they just happening in my neighborhood? But yet there's not resources enough for the things that I care about that make my community stronger.
Yeah, I think I read like 400,000 people in Arizona have lost SNAP benefits. Like half of them are going to be off Medicaid in the next year or so. And so when you think about, it's one thing and not that it's a good thing, but the state to be spending money on this stuff when things are good. But, when the fact that like these huge budget cuts are happening, the fact that they're giving away was like 50 million plus a year on these data centers, plus that's just on tax breaks. There's so much going on when it comes to costing communities things as well. I'm sure that probably helped get people radicalized about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about 57 million and the deficit for schools right now is just to even get like quality buildings, teachers paid, like in the low millions. This is clearly the fact that Arizona is not broke. It's clearly being robbed. And the culprits of this are data centers. But the big story here is that the underdog won, that everyday people coming out and really voicing their concern about this and not relenting were able to beat big lobby.
Live streams here. But there we go. Yeah. Sorry, I lost you there for a second.
Oh no.
But so people are getting activated against it, seeing how difficult things are in Arizona. I mean, nationwide, this is what's happening. So I want to I want to learn a little bit about how many were there? Which big companies? I know Arizona is home to a lot of like chip making factories as well. There's a lot of fights over that. There's a lot of fights over resources, just water in general. So kind of lay out the landscape for me in terms of data centers in Arizona and like kind of how then how did you put this coalition together?
Yeah, we've had data centers that have been around now for some time, but the last data centers that we were really contending against were these two, one in Ahwatukee and one in Chandler, where community was very staunchly opposed to these now being built in their neighborhoods. And so now any data center that is built after these two are the ones that are going to receive this moratorium. And so that's really important because Arizona has been ground zero for so many data centers coming into the state, but really people stopped this. Everyday people were the ones that actually made it possible to stand up to the bully and beat them. Everyday people stood up to these lobbyists that descended upon Arizona. There was a coalition of lobbyists that descended upon Arizona from the big AI lobby. And everyday people said, not in my neighborhood, not today.
And what's remarkable is that, Arizona is, I mean, classic swing state now. It's Republicans control by a small amount the legislature, both houses, both chambers of the legislature. Obviously, there's a Democratic governor, and this passed. And it maybe wasn't as big a ban as you kind of wanted to end the tax breaks overall. You got a 3-year pause, but tell me about how you built that coalition and what you guys did, because this is, again, it wasn't just Democrats being mad about this. It wasn't just, liberals being upset about it, or people in these communities that were being affected.
Yeah. It's been an incredible effort. Arizonans, but across the country, people are activated. People are animated. People were coming in regard to ICE data detention centers being built, but then at the same time about these data centers. And so there was this conflation of activism that happened that met at the intersection of data centers are now sort of like the icing on the cake. And I don't want that to happen in my neighborhood. And so we began to get droves of activists, of organizing community that really wanted to stop this in their neighborhood. They said not one more being built in my neighborhood. And they were able to come together. They were literally going every single day to the state capitol and talking to legislators. They were having committee meetings in their neighborhoods. We were having barrio dinners, is what we call our organizing program, and breaking bread, and also trying to strategize on how do we stop this? What legislator do we need to go speak to? What legislator do we need to bring on board, and then go talk to the governor together? And so you see everyday people that went to task and they started speaking with the governor. And so the governor was actually at the beginning of the year very aligned with us, but there was a moment where the lobby was actually starting to pressure and she was starting to sort of pull back. But community actually started doing the press conferences, the rallies, showing up at the legislature every day, and they won. And it's their moment.
It's incredible stuff. And what's amazing to me is that it wasn't something that Democrats were always against. I knew a lot of Democrats that were very pro data center. They thought it brought jobs, construction. Obviously, trade unions are into them for that reason. It wasn't this obvious partisan thing. And so to be able to convert people on both sides of the aisle to it, they must have felt a lot of pressure, because that's, like you said, there's a lot of lobbyists and a lot of money coming in. So tell me a little bit about the opposition, both from lawmakers you felt, and as well as from the AI and tech lobby.
Yeah, we really felt the pressure specifically from the tech lobby. Toward the last few weeks of the budget negotiations at the state legislature, all of our legislators were telling us that there were so many lobbyists in Arizona from big tech corporations that included Google and so many more. And the fact that they had community members in the gallery sessions while some of this was being talked about and litigated, and also unrelenting during the budget negotiations and wanting to demand time with the governor, and also with their legislators, but also holding press conferences, showing how high stakes this is in the backdrop of community members not being able to pay for everyday groceries. 400,000 people losing SNAP in Arizona. I mean, the stakes were very high and very clear, and they made their voice heard.
What I'm curious about is a lot of politicians who were behind, they kind of rushed to then eventually decided they're against it. And so, what are the arguments that you hear from politicians who were for it at first? What were the things that they were saying, and when did you notice they were kind of starting to switch?
I mean, you hear the typical things, right? It's well, we're headed toward a funding deficit. Arizona relies on AI right now in order to be able to make up that deficit. This is going to be really great for technology, for our schools. And community wasn't buying it. Community was saying, we're getting groundwater in our faucets. I'm scared that my children aren't going to have water in the future. all of the energy that this is going to take up in my neighborhood that I have to pay for. Not only are my taxpayer dollars going into these mega corporations, but also now they're going to get my taxes. That's not fair, is what they were saying. And they're saying that not today.
What's interesting is that, like you said, these are tangible. They're tangible impacts of these things, right? It's not just like people don't they don't think it looks good, right? There's no like, oh, this ruins the character of our neighborhood, or this is like aesthetically not what we want, or like philosophically. I'm curious with Arizona, it's such a water shortage there. I mean, it's already like water wars going on there. Tell me a little bit about that and how did this exacerbate those problems? I mean, you said people were getting brown water. Like, how did people feel the impacts of these data centers?
Yeah, the big sort of piece around the water challenges that we're experiencing is that in rural Arizona, there are communities whose groundwater is currently being swallowed up, gobbled up by these data centers. And so you have these communities that rely on the groundwater because they're in rural areas. And so they purchased homes where that is the mechanism by which they receive water through these groundwater systems. And so now they have no water. And for them, they have protected their water usage for so many years. They have had access to clean and fresh water through these ground systems. And now they are unable to have access to their everyday water usage. And so that's one, right? Like just everyday usage for everyday people, especially in rural areas. But then two, the Colorado River. At the moment, what we are experiencing is a significant decline in the water that we have inside of the river. And not to mention that it's not just our state that uses the Colorado River, right? There's 3 other states, including Mexico. And so these have now been longstanding challenges of why in Arizona are these data centers settling in, because we don't only have significant deficits in our economy, communities being challenged with not being able to pay their everyday expenses, but then now the water that is being stolen from everyday people.
Yeah, and it's like you said, like a lot of these rural communities, which aren't necessarily the most left-leaning and progressive. And so, Lucha's been around for a long time now. Obviously, it started, I think it was during the Joe Arpaio years, which I want to talk a little bit about the transition you guys have, or the growth, I guess you could say, not transition, but was it hard to build at all, like gain trust to get people to be involved and organized with you guys when, it's definitely like probably like untraditional or non-traditional allies, I imagine, were involved in this.
Yeah, it's been long, arduous work. During the Arpaio days, it was incredibly difficult because community lived in fear. And however, we found that actually going out and talking to everyday people and inviting them out to join us for a fight was actually more energizing and more motivating for our community members than being scared at home and not knowing whether they are going to self-deport, whether Arpaio was going to catch them. And so through that organizing, what we also found is that, our community members, the only issue on their mind was not just immigration, but also folks were worried about how, this is 2010. Folks were also worried about the cost of living, housing in particular, being able to pay utilities. Just to give a little bit of in Arizona during the summer, your utility bill can be up to $600. So because it's so hot. And so our communities were also naming that being able to have a living wage was important to them. Being able to have affordable housing was important to them. Being able to have utilities that were also affordable mattered. And we began to really organize from the place where our members were taking us, which was now affordability. And so here we are, not having taken on data center fights, but taking on affordability. And I think this is the other lens of data centers, where because of the corporate welfare that they receive, that is taking from our community their taxpayer dollars and injecting it into these corporations that are multi-million corporations, and to these CEOs that are now trillionaires, and billionaires. And so there's a bigger conversation happening within our communities about the wealth discrepancies, and then also just the stealing and burdens on our earth and resources like water.
What do you think you take from it, or other people can take from it, seeing the way both in Arizona and elsewhere, like this has become such a not nonpartisan issue, but I guess bipartisan. Like people from all political stripes are into it. I don't know if there's a realignment in it or what you would call it, but like, what do you think the lessons are from this? And like, to me, it's like a matter of like grassroots populism, winning out over kind of corporate donors. But what do you take from in the bigger picture?
Yeah, communities are hurting. Affordability is a very real thing. Your everyday people are what we're hearing from our members and from the community in the canvassing that we're doing is, I have to decide if I have gas enough to go to work and go to the grocery store, or if I just need to focus on going to work and then figure out when my next paycheck is coming to be able to pump gas to get to the grocery store, right? Like, it's not a hypothetical conversation. People are strained right now. And so they're paying attention to who's making money, who's leaving them out of the conversation, and who's benefiting from these tax breaks, from these tax incentives, from corporate welfare. And clearly, these data centers are a big piece of that.
Yeah, and imagine that, like, it's something that we see in a lot of states. Like, I mean, even, governors in a lot of places are deciding they're shifting. And so you mentioned Katie Hobbs, governor of Arizona, Democrat. She was originally, with you. She felt like, yes, we should put on this moratorium. Then you said she wobbled a little bit. You got her back for a 3-year moratorium. What were the conversations with her like, in terms of like, what do you think it was that made her wobble? And what do you think it was that kind of won her back towards you guys?
Yeah, she is trying to figure out how to ensure that she stands with community. And she's also trying to figure out like how she fights back against this corporate lobby. She had a lot of pressure. And she's also facing the same constraints that everyday people are feeling, which are the budget deficit. And so Arizona does rely on AI technology. But the governor heard full force from everyday Arizonans that are having to deal with either the cost of electricity going up because of data centers, those stories, or the challenges that people are feeling now from the groundwater not being there, not being able to shower, not being able to brush your teeth, or not being able to do it because the water is so dirty. And she took that to heart and was able to use it in her negotiations and stood strong.
One of my favorite parts about this, I got to say, is that Kyrsten Sinema, the former senator from Arizona, was on the other side of it, right? She was, and you guys have a long history with her, I know, based on her career before she became a lobbyist for crypto and AI and all them. But tell me about that, seeing her on this side of it and, like, so we meet again type deal. Because, it's, I think that adds a little more richness to it and kind of explains where the political lines are on this.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden she's back. It was not surprising to see that she was on the opposite side of everyday people, and it was, quite. It was quite energizing for everyday people who already had a chip on their shoulder about how she was so flippant about the needs of everyday Arizonans, about increasing the national minimum wage. And so people once again were able to prevail against her moral corruption. And so the people won. And I think that was another significant victory for everyday Arizonans, where they were able to Say to cinema, not today.
Do you think, what's interesting about it is like she gets hired by these, to be a lobbyist, because she had a lot of influence, I guess, when she was senator. She's got, friends in high places and all that. But I wonder, especially for voters, because she wasn't going to win a primary, right, in the Democratic Party in 2024. Do you think her being on the side of data centers was not helpful for data centers? I don't know. I'm not there, right? But how much do you think that made a difference in the way they maybe didn't want it to?
I mean, she's a failed senator. Now she's a failed lobbyist. And so the math is there. I do think it was a hindrance for data centers that also worked out for us. So yeah, all of that really does matter. I think Arizonans are very sharp, and they're paying attention, and they're turning out, and they're getting activated. And this was just another sort of piece to be activated against. Yeah.
We mentioned how Lucha started, and it's very much still involved in it. But the immigration part of it all, this is, like you said, the data center is kind of a cherry on top. But I know ICE has been around in Arizona. Like, I'm sure that's been a huge priority for you as well. And it has. I don't politically it's helped in a lot of places. I don't know. Like, what do you make of, like, how bad has it been there, and how do you think it's kind of like changed people's political attitudes, seeing what's happened on the ground with ICE in Arizona?
Yeah, I think an important context regarding ICE in Arizona is that Arizona has been ground zero for ICE, and ICE never left. And our community has been fighting against ICE presence since 2010, and dealing with the 287G agreements that cities like Mesa still have. And so we have community members actively right now at the city of Mesa fighting against these agreements that make it possible for police and ICE to collaborate. And in the backdrop of what we saw in Minnesota was an incredible effort from community to fight back against the terror and the murder of our comrades that passed. Arizona, I think, has been using this time also to create our own networks of community that provide protection. There are entire neighborhoods right now that have folks that are ready to deploy should ICE come into their neighborhoods, or when ICE comes into our neighborhoods. Our elected officials have been incredible, and so they have also been a part of this effort. And our senators have also stood with us, with community, around the issue that we're experiencing with ICE. Is it at the magnitude that we experienced in Minnesota? In Arizona, they're coming out early in the morning, sweeping entire neighborhoods, and then they just disappear. And then they'll come late at night, sweep neighborhoods. So they'll go in to find a specific person, and then they'll take everyone that is around there. So they're taking children, they're taking high schoolers, they're taking folks that are elderly. And so it has just been, as we used to call it during the SB 1070 days, a reign of terror.
Yeah, and it's, obviously Minnesota was such a national flashpoint because it was such a huge concentration in such a short time. But Arizona, like you said, it's been a reign of terror there for a long time. And so, how do you respond to that kind of stuff? You mentioned people have networks and support. I mean, there's a lot of, like Arizona, I'm sure the governor isn't excited about ICE, but, there's only so much one can do when they're the executive in charge, and a lot of it is grassroots stuff. And so you guys had the experience, right? You guys, Arpaio and all that. But so how have people responded, and what are they doing?
Yeah, our communities are by the droves going to trainings. And so you have community organizations that are hosting weekly trainings on how to be an observer, what the role of allies can be when you're in a vulnerable community. We have communities that are organizing inside of schools and supporting, along with educators, what the protection plan is for young students, and what happens if a family is taken and the child is left in the country on their own, right? So it's all of these trainings that are happening. And so inside of each network, you could think about it as precincts. But so inside of these precincts, there are people that have been trained, and there are community members inside of that precinct that are also ready to take action. And so the action can be anything from recording when ICE deploys into the neighborhood, stopping with calling the legal counsel immediately, and having the legal counsel come out and attempting to stop what ICE is doing or interrupting. So there are varying ways. There's also court accompaniment that has also been a significant issue with ICE. ICE has been going into the courts when people are showing up to check in. And so there are people that go with them. So there's like court accompaniment that unfortunately what has been happening is ICE has just been taking people. And so trainings, a very intricate data system so that we can reach out to these folks that have been trained and are ready to take action. Also, just community getting to know each other. That's a big one. Through our barrio dinners, we have dinners in these precincts, in these neighborhoods, where people come together, get to know their neighbor, get to understand and exchange numbers, share information. If something were to happen, then the community is connected through WhatsApp groups.
Yeah, it's amazing how people had to come together in such a grassroots way. And you think about, Arizona, and it's not just purely partisan, but Arizona did, went Republican in 2024 in terms of voting for Donald Trump. Like but it feels like a whole different universe. I don't know. Do you feel like different energy from 2020, 2016? How does it feel now compared to even back during those times?
Yeah. There's a feeling, and I'm sure everyone feels this, that the tectonic plates just keep moving, that there's an earthquake every day, there's new spectacle that is happening, and that's what authoritarians want, is they want the spectacle. And our communities absolutely want to disrupt that. And so what has been really incredibly energizing is that you just have people showing up into the office. I heard about this training. I want to do something. I want to be at the forefront of this fight. And even though it's a very difficult time, we're validating experiences. It is. You are not being gaslit. This is a very difficult time. And there's something that everyone can do, from a phone bang, from a door knock, to a dinner, to joining an action. Whatever is your political milieu, we have it for you. And people are doing it because people are saying enough. This is not what I signed up for. And even if people did vote for Trump, we have folks that deeply regret having voted for Trump and are joining us. And so it's been incredible to see those folks that you don't have to live in regret. You can find your community to fight against it.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of things that were promised that didn't happen. A lot of things that were maybe like misled, and it's it obviously it sucks that it happened, but it is interesting to see people, like even with the data center stuff, like come together in a way that was not happening in 2024, even 2025. Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask is, it's something I've followed a lot with Arizona is the school vouchers, because that's a huge deal in Arizona. And speaking of something that people across the aisle didn't want, it's something that Republicans passed anyways. But there's now look like there's going to be, speaking of saving money, stopping from tax giveaways. Looks like there's going to be a big initiative there. So something a little bit. I know Lucha's been involved to some degree with that. Like that is to me one of the marquee fights happening this fall. Yeah, just for context, I should have explained it before I asked you the question. But like Arizona, a bunch of years ago, became one of the first states to have a full-on school badger program. One of the biggest, what do you call it, private and charter school programs in the country, and it's up to like $1 billion a year, or something like that now. And like they go mostly to rich families, families that are wealthy, already had kids in private school. And not only, it's supposed to pay for their private school, pay for, I guess, charter school, whatever it is, but also a lot of people are homeschooled. So they'll use the money, like you said, for jet skis. They'll use them for diamond rings. They'll use them for vacations. And they'll call them, oh, this is an educational thing. We have to go to Disneyland to educate our kids. And because it's a bit of a farce. And there was still this like, no, this lack of desire or lack of willingness and political willingness to do anything about it on the Republican side. And so now there's a ballot initiative to limit who can receive them and really kind of tighten up. It's still not great to have a voucher system, but really kind of reform how it works so that like at least it's not going to the richest people who do not need your money, do not need public money to send their kids to private school. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, and there's gonna be a lot of like that. Like it feels like in Arizona, there's just kind of a template in a lot of ways. Whether it's immigration, whether it's data centers, whether it's the school vouchers, it's sort of, you obviously you want to have an agenda where you're like doing things, proactively, but also just stopping all these horrible things. It's kind of uniting people in a way, I guess, in Arizona in a way that like in a populist way you wouldn't necessarily see a few years ago. I think there's this elections this year is probably going to go mostly one way, but in terms of like the stuff with ICE, in terms of data centers and stuff, do you imagine? I mean, we're looking at like a you know and it's not that Democrats are always great, but like, do you feel like this could really, like what's happened the last few years, really shift the balance of power in Arizona? Wow. Yeah. Mm. So what does that look like to you? Because the Democrats have not been great at that in a lot of communities, but in Arizona, it's utterly essential, right, to do that there. So what does it look like? Right. I just want to take before we finish. I want to take it back to the data centers again for a minute. So you guys got a 3-year moratorium, which is huge. What comes next? Like, where do you go from there with it? Because it's like an issue that's not going to go away. That's awesome. Well, it's you definitely set a template for the rest of the country and being able to get this moratorium in and yeah, in a legislature controlled by Republicans. I think that's the most impressive part about it all. So congratulations on that and thanks for being here. It's exciting to see that so much like on the ground stuff is happening because it's very easy to despair, right? You see the Supreme Court decisions today with immigration and guns and all that. It's very easy to just be like, oh God. But then you talk to people like you and it's like, oh, people are actually doing something about it. So it's exciting. Awesome. Thanks so much.